You're listening to the Scaling Culture podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Whitney Johnson, one of the top 10 business thinkers in the world, as named by Thinkers 50, and a LinkedIn top voice with 1.8 million followers. Whitney is the CEO of Disruption Advisors and an award-winning author of multiple books, including her most recent, Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, published by Harvard Business Review Press. She also hosts the weekly Disrupt Yourself podcast with guests including Brené Brown, Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, and General Stanley McChrystal. An innovation and disruption theorist, Whitney is a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review. She teaches the S-curve of learning to managers and companies as both a keynote speaker and a frequent lecturer for Harvard Business School's corporate learning. In this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Whitney discuss what is the S-curve of learning and key stages of growth, how to grow your people and help them find their S-curve, how to use the S-curve to become better leaders, and how to use the S-curve to design your team and scale it across the organization. This S-curve concept gives leaders great language to use in coaching and developing their team members. Plus, in the episode, Whitney gives a trick for ensuring your feedback is well received. Before diving into today's episode, be sure to subscribe for our podcast and check out our Scaling Culture Masterclass, the 8-module playbook on how to build a high-performing, resilient team that covers all things culture, from creating and activating core values and culture-driven screening and onboarding to building relationships, change management, and operating as a team. To learn more or purchase the masterclass, please go to scalingculture.org. And this episode of Scaling Culture is sponsored by Spoken. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today I'm very excited to have Whitney Johnson with us. Whitney, good to see you.
Ron, it's nice to see you as well. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I was really excited. You know, it was funny. We were chatting just briefly. I had your book with me on vacation. Then I left it there, and then I just got another copy. So I breezed through it, but I haven't dove into it as much as I would like before this episode. So I'm really excited to get into the content.
I am too. So I'll tell you why I had such a long pause, because I think it's interesting. As soon as you started talking about diving into the content, I was thinking about how you said you used to be a bodyguard and you worked, for Jay-Z. And I was like, I wonder if we could apply the S-curve of learning, which we'll talk about in a minute, to being a bodyguard. So that's where my head went. That's why I started to pause.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I'm excited to see where else this can be applied to, because I feel like it can be applied in all kinds of different avenues. So let's start there. Let's go back to the idea. What was what sparked the idea of the S-curve?
Yeah. So in my prior life, we all have prior lives. In my prior life, I was an equity analyst and worked on Wall Street, award-winning analyst. And then I had started a fund with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, and we were investing in disruptive innovation. And one of the things that we did is we used the S-curve that was popularized by the sociologist Everett Rogers to figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. And understanding that this is a way to think about how do groups change, how do they adopt new products, services, et cetera. And as we were applying this to investing, I had this this insight that the S-curve could also help us understand how people grow, how we change. And so the basic idea is that every time we start something new, we're on a new S-curve. And if your listeners want to, with me for a minute, take their finger and draw from left to right a horizontal line, the first part of that S-curve is the launch point. And this is that place where you're starting a new project, a new role, a new hobby, a new year, a new day, and you're at the launch point. And what's happening there in our brains is that our brain is making a lot of predictions about what we think will happen. We have this hypothesis, but many of those predictions are inaccurate. So because they're inaccurate, our dopamine drops. And so it's not that growth isn't happening, it's just very slow. And so we can feel impatient, we can feel discouraged, we could feel overwhelmed because we can't put all those pieces together. So the experience that you're having at the launch point of a curve is that it just feels slow. So that's the first part of the curve. Now I want you to take your finger and I want you to draw another line, which is I want you to go sort of this from bottom to the top, like the sleek, steep back of an S, that wonderful sinuous shape. And that is the second part. That's the sweet spot of that S curve. And what's happening here in your brain is it's making these predictions, but those predictions are increasingly accurate. And because they're increasingly accurate, you're getting lots and lots of dopamine, lots of emotional upside surprises. And so it's still hard, but it's no longer too hard. And it's definitely easier, but it's not too easy. So it feels exhilarating. You feel like you're right where you're supposed to be. Growth is fast. It feels fast. And this is the sweet spot of your growth. And then there's a third stage. And the third stage, I want you to take your finger again and draw from left to right. It's a flat horizontal line. And this is the mastery stage. And here your predictive model is you've figured it out. You're very good. Maybe this is what happened to you when you were a bodyguard. You're like, I'm good at this. I know how to do this, but I'm no longer learning. And so your brain says, I got to do something new, because if I don't, this plateau is going to become a precipice. And so at this point, your growth is in fact slow. So the S curve, slow, fast, slow, is how you grow. And it gives you this simple, and it's purposely simple visual model to think about what growth looks like. And once you know what growth looks like, it allows you to figure out, where am I and what's next? And you can apply it into all sorts of aspects of your life. So that's a quick overview.
So interesting. A couple of thoughts. One, for the record, one time I was in an elevator with Ringo Starr and I pressed the wrong floor to get off. And Ringo looked at it and he said, like, we're on the wrong floor. He said, you couldn't guard a dead body, could you? I said, no, not really. He made fun of me on it. That was on his Ringo Rama tour. So I probably could have used these skills way back then, but I wanted to, I want to talk about the S curve and some of these points for a second and kind of draw it back to my own experience. So first off, the first time I heard about the S curve in business was actually at I may have mentioned this before, but it was at the Harvard Extension School Design Thinking course, which blew me away. I love that. And so you've taken the business S curve and applied it to people and how and people's journey along that S curve, correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Right.
I've taken the diffusion curve that we thought about products or services or group change and said, this applies to us as an individual. This can map personal growth.
So on this, the second portion of that was my curiosity, really, because I went through my own journey, which continues, but I really went through a place where before getting to mastery, I was trying to figure out new skills. So for instance, I'm dyslexic and I've always had challenges with financing. And at one point I was going to take a finance course and I was like, I need to pick up this new skill because it would be, it would add value to what I'm doing. And then I went through this long process and got to a place where I said, you know what, someone's going to do this better than me. I'm just going to hire that. And I'm going to continue. I'm going to get better at building relationships. And so that became kind of my mastery was, I continue on that journey to try to put my efforts and learning into that space. But where, does that happen a lot where people veer and they can't really figure out what the lane is for them on the second tranche of the curve? What have you seen? What does the data show?
Well, what I love, so first of all, let's talk about finance, because I think that's very interesting, is that there are an infinitesimal number of S curves that we can be on. And so one of the things that we're doing when we're at the launch point is there's this exploratory phase. That's the first phase, is you decide whether you chose to be on that curve or whether you were pushed onto that curve. You still have to make a decision. Do I actually want to be here? And, I'm on a desert island. Do I want to stay or do I want to go? Do I want to get off today? And so one of the things that you were doing when you were at the launch point of thinking about becoming good at finance is you were exploring, you were collecting data, and you finally said, you know what, this isn't for me. I don't want to be on this S curve. I'm going to delegate this S curve to someone else so that I can move along the S curve in areas that I actually care about, and more importantly, that are going to leverage my unique gifts and talents so that I can make my greatest contribution.
But in this case, if I had have liked finance, I would start a new S curve of finance, right? But I just didn't. That was gone. I got it.
Right. You chose that. So then what you made the decision is, there's all this sorting and sifting. I don't want that S-curve. I don't want that S-curve. I don't want this one. I don't want that one. And what you said is, you know what? I like being on this S-curve of building relationships. I don't know what we'll do with those relationships, but I enjoy people. I like being around people, and I like to see what happens when I'm around people. Now, what could happen here is you could get to the point where you're like, you do the same old thing that you always did in terms of how you interact with people. That would be in mastery. That would be this place where you're getting bored and you need to do something new. But what I hear you saying is you got into the sweet spot in terms of building relationships, and you're continually finding ways to challenge yourself in terms of what those look like, how you interact with people, who you interact with, what you do as a consequence of those relationships, continually refining that. So you're never getting into mastery. You're just perpetually staying in this place of optimized tension of being in the sweet spot around your relationships. There are micro curves within that, but you're in the sweet spot overall.
And is that the optimal place to be? Because if you hit mastery, you're kind of on the, okay, I need to find my new curve. I'm getting lazy here. I just stay in this lazy zone, or am I wrong?
Yes and no. So if you think about relationships, you said you before we got on, you're married, you have 3 children. You want to stay in the sweet spot in your relationships perpetually, right? And so you do different things in order to figure out how to stay in the sweet spot with those relationships. So the answer is yes and no, because in order for you or me to really be a peak performer in our profession, in our life, we need to be able to master all 3 phases of the growth cycle. We need to be very good and figure out how to get into the sweet spot, but we need to know how to navigate the launch point. We need to know, okay, I'm going to go to this place of discomfort. How do I navigate that so I move through that effectively? And we also need to know how to be in mastery and be very good at something and figure out how to make that decision to do something new. And it's that ability to complete that growth cycle that actually allows us to be at our best, to like I said, to be a peak performer.
So there's this quote, and I don't know who it might be from a gentleman by the name of Vern Harnish, but this quote that I love, which is, the skills that you have today are the same skills that get in your way as you try to grow, or scale your company, whatever that is. Where does that land in the S-curve?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. This is fun. So I would say that quote is a mastery quote.
Okay.
So for example, I'm in mastery and I want to keep doing the same thing that I've been doing. And I've gotten now overly reliant on those skills. I can do it in my sleep. I'm not learning anything. And so what's going to happen now is, if I'm so reliant on those, I can actually sabotage my own growth because I'm bored, or I'll get disrupted. Now, if you'll use those skills and leverage them to do something new, they're very useful to you. But if you there is no such thing as coasting. That plateau does become a precipice. Now, let me give you a quick example I think is a great illustration of this. Dan Shapiro, who is the chief, he's a very senior executive at LinkedIn. I think he's the chief revenue officer, if I'm
Heard the name.
Yeah, maybe we Google him. But anyway, senior executive at LinkedIn. Well, several years ago, he had moved up the rank in sales. He was the most senior person in sales, had gone into the CEO and said, someday I'd like to be a tech CEO. And the CEO said to him, well, if that's your dream, you're in the wrong job. He's like, what? Like, I'm nailing it from sales. I took this from $10 million to $1 billion in sales, and you're telling me I'm in the wrong job. He said, yeah, if you want to be a CEO, you have to go into product. He's like, okay, well, all right, then why don't I go into product? I'm like, what? You can't go into product. You don't know anything about product. He's like, no, I want to go into
S-curve. Like, that's a
brand new, totally new S-curve. So he goes into product. I mean, the fact that they let him do this is astonishing, but he goes into product. He now has, instead of 1,000 total reports, he has 3 engineers he's working with, and no
That sounds like an easier time.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the take home that I wanted to say. Initially, he was very bad at product because he had never done it before. But slowly, then quickly, like launch point, then sweet spot, he became exceptional at it. Why? Because he was able to bring all of those skills that he had in sales of running a massive team to inform how he ran product. So to that quote, yes, you jump to a new curve. You take everything that you have with you, but you don't stay there. You jump to do something new. And then you leverage everything you know in order to move along your new curve.
So let's go to the other side of that, which is managing people through the S-curve, right? As a leader, how do you manage people? Because I know from my own experience, I've had a lot of tough conversations where I've, talked to someone and said, look, Whitney, I know you like sales, but you're just, I know that your DNA is not to have conflict or you have trouble closing because you don't want any conflict. You feel uncomfortable with that. So unless you can get through that, there's a different, seat on this bus for you. And I think you're so detailed, you should be in operations. You're so good at the detail side of things.
Yeah.
And those have been tough conversations. What is your, how do you look at this from guiding someone along the S-curve and even figuring out what, if that, from the launch pad perspective, saying, wow, this is the wrong launch pad for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those are actually two different questions. So let me answer the managing along the curve first, and then we'll talk about if it's not the right curve.
Got it. Okay.
So if you've got someone, well, actually, we'll see. Let's see where we go. So if you've got someone on the launch point, brand new, and brand new can be a brand new CEO, by the way. Like brand new isn't just someone straight out of college. So you've got someone on the launch point. What do we know? We know that it's going to feel overwhelming. They're going to feel discouraged. They're going to feel inept. They've got a loss of identity because they're not who they were. They're who they are now. And who is that? And so what you need at the launch point is you need a lot of encouragement. You need a lot of support. And that can look like simply words of encouragement. I put you here because I think you can do it.
And Whitney,
yes.
Sorry, but I think I read in your book, this isn't a time to challenge someone. This is a time to support, right? To not like test them, I think was the wording I read in the book, right?
That's right. Because you already made the decision. You already tested them.
Yeah. The interview was the test as best you could. Yeah.
Right. The interview was the test, or their prior role was a test, and you made the decision that you wanted to put them here. Now is not the time to keep retesting them because they're already feeling really tentative and uncomfortable. So what they need is they need support. Like I said, words of encouragement. Here's why I put you here. They need training. Like, what do you need? And they need to tell you what they need in order to move along that curve. And they also need lots of feedback. One of the things that we do when someone's new is we say, oh, well, they're brand new. I'm not going to give them feedback. No, you've got to give them feedback on day one, because if you say, good job, good job, good job, they'll be like, okay, when are they going to kill me dead? Because when are they going to tell me the things that aren't working? And so you just put them out of their misery. And on day one, you find something to say, hey, this isn't working, or this, can you fix this? So then they'll say, oh, Ron just gave me feedback and he didn't kill me dead. I think it's safe here. That means I can make progress.
I like that.
Okay. So that's the third thing. And then the fourth and perhaps most important thing and way to support someone to the launch point is to value the fact that they are inexperienced. Because at the launch point, they are able to say, why do we do it like this? They've got fresh eyes, a fresh perspective. And to be willing to be open to that, why do we do it like this, instead of saying, just go do your job. Because when they ask those questions, those open the door to innovation. But more importantly, you are supporting them because you're allowing them to feel like they're contributing in some way, albeit small. So that's the launch point.
Love that.
You know what? I'm going to answer your question now, because I think this is your other question. What if it's not the right curve? At the launch point, if you map against Erickson's 10,000 hour rule, it's going to take you 3 to 6 months to move off the launch point. So what you're going to find is, and what you want to track is this person gaining momentum in this role? And you want to early on give them really small things that they can measure to gain traction. But if they're not gaining momentum, then what you can do is you can draw out the S-curve and say, here's what it looks like. Here's what we expect on the launch point. You're not moving along this. It doesn't mean I don't value you and I don't want you here. I just think it might be the wrong S-curve. So let's find the right one for you.
Right. I like that. Interesting.
This episode of Scaling Culture is sponsored by Spoken. And speaking of scaling culture, how do you build culture and keep your employees engaged when everyone is remote? Let's face it, no one has completely figured it out yet. That's why we got so excited when we heard about the cool things companies like Robinhood, Snick, and Udemy are doing with Spoken. Spoken is a podcasting platform for the workplace. They help companies tap into the popularity of podcasts to tackle their biggest people priorities without adding more Zoom calls to the day. Udemy, for example, launched a podcast to introduce new company leaders, helping build connection and trust with their team faster while everyone is remote. The other example our team really likes is how Robinhood is using Spoken to help employees get the most out of their performance reviews. They're creating podcasts with stories and advice from company leaders, stories and advice that are really tied to the company's values, which when you think about it, makes it so much more relevant and actionable than any content from outside parties. We believe sharing stories are critical in driving home core values and bringing them to life in an organization as time goes on. We share stories in our own onboarding, but love the idea of having a platform designed specifically for this type of content. Pretty cool, right? Head over to getspoken.com/scalingculture. That's spoken without the E to learn more about all the different ways podcasting on their platform can help transform your remote culture. That's getspoken.com/scalingculture. Now back to the show.
And let me go back to, because this is actually, kind of a real-time situation. I'm having a 1-month check-in with our new COO for my real estate company, Vita. And he's doing a phenomenal job. I have really good feedback. I don't know if I have, what do you do if you can't find the, I don't want to make fun of his clothing. I don't think that's fair right now.
Yeah.
What do you, just in that point, I'm just trying to, and what I've done to try to find that is called his peers quickly and said, hey, what do you think? Well, if there's one thing that maybe he could do differently, what would it be? And those are the questions I'm trying to ask anyways, Well,
in this particular instance, I think that's terrific. I think what I would do is then just talk about the process, say things are going really well. So here's my question for you. How do you, when I see something that I'm like, oh yeah, let's tweak this. How do you want me to deliver it to you?
Ooh, I love that.
And what do you think you could be doing better? What do you think I could be doing better? So that since it's already working, then use this as an opportunity to just make it work better.
I love that. You've really opened it up. And what you've also done is introduced, I am going to give you feedback. It's coming. And so I love because there's something compassionate and empathetic about, and how would you like the feedback? What's the best way for you to receive it? Because I'm happy to do that for you, right? I love that.
Right. And Ron, one other thought that just came to mind, I think is really important, is that most people don't like conflict. And you'll appreciate this, is there was a terrific book called The Psychology of Killing that was by a former military fellow. And it was fascinating. And he said that when we give feedback to someone, it feels emotionally like they're assaulting us. So it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to receive and it's really hard to give. And so one of the things that I say to people is that it is uncomfortable to give feedback. So the fact that I am doing it means that I am invested in you and I'm invested in our relationship. And so when I say that, remember, I'm giving you this feedback because I'm invested in you, that always makes them go, oh yeah, right. Of course she is. Because if she didn't care, she didn't want me to develop, if she didn't want our relationship to work, she wouldn't say anything, because it's really uncomfortable to say something.
It's interesting because, and I wish I had have known this in my early years, because it was, and I feel like I had an easier time because when I started in the security business, I started doing nightclubs. And I was working with my friends. And so I was actually good at hey, let's have a beer, but hey, tuck in your shirt. I could separate both. But later on, when I sold the business, when I was 37, 5 years ago, I had a business coach. And I can't believe I waited that long to get a coach. I find now that quite stupid. And so anyways.
Don't we all, Ron? Don't we all?
Right? Then you find there's more, even though I sold the business, there's so much I don't know. There's so much to learn. And that comes later, but it is the journey. And we worked on a framework, a 1, 2, 3 punch for feedback. And I want to run it by you. I want to get your thoughts on it. And please poke at it. It's similar. It's in the same spirit of what you said. So
Yeah.
the three things which have changed feedback for me, and I've added a fourth. So, and I'll go back to the fourth later, but the 1, 2, 3 punch. One is the intention, which is what you were saying. Hey, I'm giving this to you but the intention, because the feedback sometimes I used to say, oh, if you were the salesperson, I'd say, Whitney, I want to talk to you because your sales are not where they need to be. That's how I would start. Now, the new 1, 2, 3 punch would be, look, the intention is of this conversation that you become the best salesperson possible, better than I ever was. And I want to really lift you up and make sure that you're crushing it here and support you in any way possible. So, this is for your intention. And then 2 is the outcomes. Let's talk about this, that, and the other. But 3, which was unexpected for me in the process, was how do you want the person to experience you? And so I will actually prep, and I can be the fast, Irish entrepreneur that, security guy that pounds the table and be quite aggressive. But that certainly isn't how I'd like you to leave the conversation. I'd want you to say Ron was a great listener, and he was compassionate, and he really cared for me, and he asked me great questions. He didn't interrupt me. And so I'll write these things down before I go in. Now, I did learn the fourth thing, which I think was a lesson, is this pre-check-in before feedback, which has burned me a few times. One time I was working during the pandemic. We had an employee who was really struggling, and I was getting ready to give feedback, and I followed the play, and I thought, this isn't working. What happened? I didn't do a check-in. I didn't say, Whitney, how are you feeling? Are you okay to have this conversation? Like, did you sleep well last night? How are things going with you? Because maybe the timing is really awful for this, no matter how well I follow the play.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that? A lot to digest, maybe.
Well, okay. So first of all, I think the intention really matters, and even more, and to this idea of intention, I will say it slightly differently when I'm coaching is you need to love this person. Like
Right.
in your soul, you need to feel a sense of love and respect for this person, because if you don't, they will feel it no matter what you say. And so I think that's one thing that I would add to it. And
But how do you deliver that? So walk me through that. What does that look like, that, in the messaging, I guess?
it's how you feel.
So it's your energy.
It's your energy. It's
Right.
your energy. It's the sense of, and we all know it. So for example, am I delivering this as I'm getting ready to talk to you? Am I delivering this in my heart? Am I feeling a sense of, I want you to be the best salesperson ever?
Right.
Or in my heart, am I pretty ticked off because you didn't hit your numbers? I'm trying to be nice.
Does that mean a timing thing? So that's an internal reflection. Say, I'm not going to talk to Ron about this right now. I'm going to wait because I'm just a little ticked. Right. Okay.
I need to get to the point where I can say, so that, yes, it is a timing thing. It is, am I in this place where I emotionally can deliver this information in a way that will support them and that I care about them and I respect them? And by the way, if I'm not in that place, then it may not be the right S-curve for them to work for me, because you need to feel that way about the people that work for you.
So I love that. So just to pause there, I talked about checking in with the individual. You're saying, yeah, but you did look in the mirror too. You need to do a double check, right? Because you need to be really feeling, you need to be in the moment, present, and feeling the love and feeling,
right. Yeah. And so, and one other thing that I would add, that this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, actually, is that there are certain things that trigger us. We all have these triggers. And so I actually have started saying, which is shocking that I'm doing this, but I think it's really important, is saying to someone, this thing in particular, when it doesn't, like when I feel like people aren't listening to my feedback, it actually triggers me. And so if I get triggered, I go from 0 to 100 in terms of frustration really fast. And
how does that show up?
So what I'll say to, I'll just get dismissive, like, I don't love them in that moment. Right. And so I'll say to them, here's something that we want to work on. I want you to know that sometimes I can get triggered around this. And so if it feels especially fraught, that is why. But I still want you to know that I care about our relationship. I care about you being more effective, but I want you to know what's going on here. So you're more transparent, but then they know what's going on, and then they can actually hear what you're saying.
Right.
And then back to your original question on the check-in, I think that's right. Because if someone says, you're saying, I want to give you feedback, and you find out that yes, their entire family has COVID, probably not the day to do it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Interesting. And it's such a, I find these tools and these conversations so helpful, right? There's a mastery to it. You really can have a whole bunch of tools that you can pull out and deliver in the right time. But the framework, and I love what you're saying, and I'll certainly add that, is, are you in it? How do you feel? Checking yourself and making sure that your energy is where it needs to be to have that conversation.
Right.
Because you're right. They'll read it like a book,
They will. And again,
Yeah.
if you can't get your energy there, then there's something else happening that you've got to figure out.
Right. So I wanted to talk about the S-curve in how it's applied to self-development. And when we're using self-development, is that from a leader's perspective, how we develop and provide learning and guidance to you who's going through the S-curve?
It's both. Okay. So for example, I mean, we've been skating around this idea in our conversation from a self-development standpoint of when we understand what this looks like, and we have this visual model for what growth looks like. When we decide, okay, I'm going to start something new. In fact, I had someone who endorsed the book say to me after they read the book, they said, oh, I'm working on my next book. And I realized that I was like really struggling and feeling awkward and uncomfortable. And they said, knowing the S-curve helped me. Because I was like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to feel uncomfortable. So it helps you manage the emotional arc of your personal growth, no matter what it is you're trying to do, something new, trying to be a parent of children under 5 kind of thing, right? So there's that. But then you can also use it as an artifact in developing the people on your team, of being able to have that conversation. And I'll give you a specific example. So a company that we work with, it's called Chatbooks. They turn Instagram photos into books. And they've built this great culture. People like to work there, but it means that people have been there for a while, and many of their people are in mastery. And so we administered our S-curve insight tool, helped everybody figure out, okay, yep, they're in mastery, just like we thought they were. But then what it did is allowed them to have several conversations. Conversation number 1 was with the chief marketing officer, who said, yep, I am in mastery. Yes, I am bored. Nope, there isn't something new for me to do here. She was able to have a conversation with the CEO, and now it wasn't personal. It wasn't, I don't like Chatbooks. It's not that I don't like you. It's just that I'm not getting any dopamine.
Right.
And there's not a new curve for me here. I've been here 7 years. I need to go somewhere else. But then it was very amicable, because it was just, yeah, she needs a new curve. In another instance, what they found out is, and this goes more to succession planning, is the president was saying, hey, I feel like I'm in mastery, but that's because you, the CEO, are kind of still cramming me down on my curve because you're not jumping to your own new curve. And so they were able to have this conversation around roles and responsibilities. So the CEO could actually go do his new S-curve. And that created this headway along the curve, or headroom, on the curve for the president. So he wasn't in mastery. He was still in the sweet spot because he had room to grow in that role. And then the third example would be is that the CTO was taking on a bunch of new responsibilities that were putting him at the launch point. It gave him permission. It gave him an ability to talk his team through, hey, everybody, doing this new stuff. I'm going to feel kind of awkward. If I get cranky, you'll know why. And it gave him permission to be in that place of discomfort, and everybody not thinking less of him because he was doing something new. So that's how you can use it as a manager to develop your people, to have that conversation around growth.
I love the piece about the CTO, because that's similar to what we just talked about in the feedback conversation. Here's a hot button, just so you know, and here's how I might show up. But talking about that in the development stage of on the launch pad, and saying, hey, this is new to me. I don't know. I'm drinking from a fire hose, so be patient with me. I don't have the answers. I'm going to try to figure it out. I might get frustrated. I love that. And that seems to be a really important part, especially if you're in a company where you have the relationships and you're launching a new S-curve.
That's right. Right. And I love how you said, instead of trigger hot button, that sounds so much more genteel. Yeah. So Exactly. When you talk about it out loud, then people will, you're giving yourself permission to grow, and you're giving everybody else on your team permission to grow as well.
Yeah, I love that. And so what about, when it comes to designing and building a team and utilizing the S-curve, how do we use that to whether it's org design or designing our team for the business and the requirements today?
I thought you would never ask. I'm just kidding. I love talking about this. So yeah, you can use it personally. You can use it for growing your people. What we found is that as you're thinking about your team, and if you're trying to build an organization that can grow, an organization that can innovate, then you need people at different points along the curve. And so as a starting point, think about a standard bell curve distribution. You want at least 60% of your people in the sweet spot of their growth, because that's where they're growing fast. They're still asking questions like, well, why are we doing it like this or that? But they're also capable of asking questions. So that's this place of optimized tension.
But their energy would be, again, this is the dopamine spot. I'm excited. My energy's good, right?
Yep. Your energy's good. You feel like, and we talk about in the book, we've got this Goldilocks table of like the different things that you feel. And there's a sense of growing identity of like, yes, I can do this. This is who I am. Like you said, there's an energy to do it. And this sense of, I can do this. Like I thought I could, but now I know I can do this. And because in fact, I am doing it. So that's at least 60%. Now you do want, as a starting point, to think to yourself, okay, I'd like to have 10 to 20% of my people at the launch point. Sometimes you won't, and that's okay. But then you've got to figure out, what am I going to do to make sure that I still have that fresh approach to the business so that we don't get stagnant? So right. How am I going to cultivate that if I don't have people at the launch point on my team? And then you want to have 10 to 20% of your people in mastery, because those are your people who are your institutional memory. Those are the people who are expert in organization, advisors, et cetera, who could say, yeah, we did try this. So why don't you think about X, Y, or Z? And they can really serve as the anchor, basically helping everybody else come along, the belayer from the top. And they're at the top of the mountain. They've got that perspective.
So I'm curious about that. So, because as you're talking about that, I've been thinking about, I always surround myself with key advisors. And I feel like for startups, that's going to be tough in some cases to have someone at mastery, because it's a new startup and the business on its own S-curve, right? Mm-hmm. And so are some companies in that phase kind of outsourcing the mastery? And yes. Right?
Bingo. Yeah, you absolutely answered it. Yeah. So when you're in a startup phase, you probably don't have the money, you don't have the resources to go out and hire your experts. And so you either get them on your board of advisors or you hire consultants. You basically get a SWAT team. And
because you're yourself doing 8 S-curves. I'm on 8 S-curves right now.
That's right. You're on 8 S-curves. And as an entrepreneur, you're at the launch point of that S-curve. And so you actually, and this is something we've seen in our own business, as we're growing and scaling our business, we don't have the luxury of hiring people at the launch point, because we ourselves are trying to learn so quickly. And so we need to have people who are either in the sweet spot or in mastery. At a larger, more established organization, you can absolutely afford to have lots of people at the launch point, because you've got the resources to do the training, et cetera. So that's why I said, use the bell curve, the standard bell curve, as a starting point, but you're going to adjust it depending on your industry, depending on the stage of growth of your company.
I love that. And I wanted to ask you if there was a strategy around how do you scale the S-curve within your company? So whether you were upgrading your values or creating your values to create your culture, is there certain language that you're advising folks that they should put in their core values to help kind of lean into the S-curve? How do you scale it?
Well, I guess because this is a podcast about scaling culture, we needed to ask that right. question. Did we not? Yeah. So what I have found, Ron, is that when people, because the S-curve is so simple and it's so visual, it immediately becomes a language for people to talk about growth. And so it scales very quickly and very easily. Because once you introduce this, then people have a language and they can say, when someone says, oh, I'm on the launch point right now, everybody knows exactly what experience they're having. And hey, Ron, I think I'm in mastery. Let's have a conversation. Or oh, I'm in the sweet spot. It's awesome. So you now have this way to talk about the experience that you're having. You have a way to see where other people are, because again, I might think you're in the sweet spot, but if you think you're in mastery, that's going to predict your behavior, not where I think you are. So it now allows you to figure out and think through succession planning. So you scale it by introducing it.
Right.
And by being willing to allow people to use this language, then it becomes this touchstone, whether it's growing your people or growing the organization. Because as you said earlier, maybe as a business, you're on the launch point of the curve.
Mm-hmm. And it also feels like, as I reflect to my own company, we're changing so rapidly and scaling so quickly. It's probably allowing people more time before they hit mastery, because they have to kind of, they're still in the operations lane, but what they did yesterday is not what they're doing today. And the problems are very different. They have to maybe take on new skills they're chasing mastery.
Yeah. So what my guess would be, my hypothesis in your instance would be, is that you brought people in because they were masters in something. They have domain expertise. But depending on the day, depending on the project, they are toggling back and forth between launch point and sweet spot, launch point and sweet spot. So they've got this mastery in terms of domain, but because you're toggling back between launch point and sweet spot of the exercises or the work that they're doing, they're pretty much in the sweet spot most of the time, because they feel like it's hard, but not too hard. And they're just having fun.
Yeah. I love it. When you, as we kind of come to the end, I did want to talk about your podcast, but before that, what else have we not talked about that you think would be something that we may have missed or glazed over that you think is really important for the listeners today?
I don't think that this has been really fun and interesting. And I think we've touched on everything that's important. I think what I'd like to do is just underscore the basic idea of, when you understand this model, this simple model of what growth looks like, it will increase your capacity to grow, because you'll know, oh, here's where I am right now. Here's the experience I'm having, and therefore I can navigate it more quickly. And so that's the thing I want to underscore, is use this to help you grow faster. I
love that. Yeah. That seems to be the key headline is even the understanding of the process and where you are in the process to even help you. I love, even at the beginning when you said, if you understood it, then you'd understand you're going to be frustrated at the launch point. You are going to be, until you get to the sweet spot, right? Yeah, I love that. So look, let's finish with Disrupt Yourself. I actually didn't know about your podcast. It just landed on my desk the other day as I was researching you. You've had some phenomenal guests. I feel like my life, I've had to disrupt myself 10 times and I continue to try to do it. Tell me about what got you into the podcast. I was curious, and give us an overview of it.
Oh, yeah. So, we can talk shop for a minute, because it's a fun question. So I have always liked interviewing people. I've always liked having conversations with people and understanding. Sunil Gupta, who I had on the podcast a few months ago, and he wrote a book called Backable. Afterwards, he said something to me. He said, you want to understand the essence of a person. And I realized, yeah, that's, how someone names you and you're like, this is awesome what they just did. And I thought that's true. I enjoy that experience. And I think when you interview someone for a half an hour or 45 minutes, if you're really present, you get the essence of that person. And that is a magical moment. I mean, like, I'm getting emotional as I'm describing it. There's a magical thing that happens in that moment.
Absolutely.
So I think that was my initial motivation for it. There have been also sorts of knock-on or follow-on benefits of it. It's ended up being great opportunity to research for my book. Like, you read my book, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that little snippet of an interview. So it allows me to do that. It allows me to continually be learning, because I end up reading lots and lots of books to prepare for the podcasts. And then it also ends up becoming an opportunity for business development, because people are much more likely to want to work with you if they've been able to get a sense of your essence. And you can get that when you're listening to interviews.
I love that.
So,
Well,
so what about you? Why do you like doing it?
well, it's funny. As I was listening to you speak, a lot of the same, like I feel like we're doing for a lot of the same reasons. And I get excited about the podcast, and I tell other people, I say, look, I used to go to a conference and I would be talked at for all day. And I would meet someone like yourself and maybe get a, hey, how are you at the lunch table? It was awkward and you're just trying to eat now and I'm bothering you. There was no conversation. And so I would agree. I mean, this podcast for me has been, it forces me to learn in a different way, right? It's a deep dive into a conversation. It's not me flicking through and what do you call it? Doom scrolling, where I just get a snippet of something, go to something that had nothing to do with that thing, or,
Right.
And so it's been incredible. And the relationships, which as you heard are very important to me. I've been able to build so many incredible relationships. And so I've really enjoyed it. And I would say that my passion is people and culture. And I think it's been one of the most challenging things as I was building my private security business across Canada. We would peak at 3,500 employees, full and part-time. And we really had to, when I almost went into business in 2014, 15, the question of how would I restart this industry from scratch, and building culture was a key headline. And I became obsessive about how do you build the right culture? Because I always go back to sports and say, look, if you build the right team, you win. You win the game. And business, to me, I don't want to call it a game, but I look at it like that. I'm competitive. And I think with the right team members on board, you win. And I was I think the other thing that I think about today and that the podcast has brought to life is that from a culture perspective, it used to be this transaction of, Whitney, I only care about how you show up at work. Whatever happens to you at home, that's your business, and don't bring it to work. But that's changed. Now it's, what is going on? How do I make you the best version of yourself so I get a piece of that? And I've learned a lot through the podcast on that.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And you made me think of one more thing. I think that I use it for teaching. I don't know if you do this, but I'll say to people, hey, if you're struggling with X, go listen to that podcast. And so it becomes a teaching tool as well. Do you do the same thing?
100%. All the time. I flip it to people. I could have a coffee with someone, and I hope they don't look at it as a bragging thing, but like, you need to listen to the episode with Whitney Johnson. That's where we talked about this. And I really think it's a gift to be able to pass that stuff off. And Whitney, it was a gift to have you here today. So I really appreciate your time. I've loved the conversation. I'm prepared for my meeting today at 2:00, which is great through this. So it was excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a delight.
For more information about Whitney and her book and her work, please follow her on LinkedIn or go to her author page on Amazon. To learn more or purchase the Scaling Culture Masterclass, please go to scalingculture.org. And if you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please subscribe and share. We'll be back soon with another incredible guest.